dying and then being forced to make the incredibly complicated and emotional decision of which one of your two husbands you want to spend the rest of eternity with sounds like a scenario that would be used to torture somebody in the bad place, but in fact, it's just the Eternity movie.
Holy forking shirt! Hang on! Wait a minute. You know what? Holy smokes. This is the bad place. 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 This is the bad place.
Beef, 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 beef.
Oh, this is the bad place.
Eternity is A24's fantasy rom-com directed by David Frayne and written by David Frayne and Patrick Cunnan. In the transitional world between life and the afterlife, Joan must decide how she would like to spend her eternity, whether that be Luke, her first husband and first love who tragically died very young in the war, or with Larry, her second husband with whom she spent 65 years of her life with. I was inspired to make today's video about Eternity because I feel like it is a bit of an underrated gem. For a movie with a budget of $12 million, I think Eternity did pretty decently at the box office, grossing about $36 million worldwide, but I still feel like it had a quick come and go, and maybe I'm part of the problem as I did not see Eternity in theaters and I should have, but now that I have watched it back, I wanted to come on here and give it a little bit of praise because I have previously discussed on this channel the state of the rom-com genre and how I think that nowadays Hollywood just doesn't put a lot of effort into making rom-coms, and I've also previously discussed the love triangle trope in particular and where it could be written very poorly. And although the love triangle is not my favorite trope, there has been this sort of resurgence of the love triangle in a lot of media recently with stuff like The Materialist and The Summer I Turned Pretty. Because I have been disappointed with the state of many rom-coms recently, as well as being disappointed with how a lot of these love triangles are getting written, I didn't really have high expectations for the Eternity movie. So I found myself pleasantly surprised when I sat down to watch Eternity and I was gifted with this really compelling story that also was really well made. And I was beating myself up for not actually going to see this when it came out in theaters because I know I am part of the problem. But after watching this movie and really enjoying it, I wanted to come on and talk about it because I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this movie in general, and that's why I feel it's so underrated. So let's get a little bit more into what I really loved about Eternity. Before I get into a more spoiler-heavy discussion on the movie's writing and in particular why I found their love triangle to be so compelling and well written, I want to talk a little bit about some general aspects of the movie that I really enjoyed. The first one being it has an actual unique and interesting concept. Nowadays, it feels like a huge percentage of movies that are being made and put out are a remake or a sequel or some other kind of intellectual property. It doesn't feel like we always see really unique and interesting ideas. So when a movie comes along with a concept that is very different from anything else I've seen before, I have to give it some praise. And I think the movie Eternity really draws you in with their interesting fantasy concept. For one, I really appreciated the way that they built the world of this junction and the way the afterlife works in the junction. I think it gave way for the movie to make a lot of really funny jokes about life and death and the afterlife in general. It felt almost like The Good Place kind of jokes to me, and The Good Place is another piece of media that explores the concept of the afterlife. One of my favorite parts of Eternity are a lot of the jokes that are in the background of what we're watching, and it reminded me of in The Good Place how there's a lot of really silly shop names and restaurant names in the background of the neighborhood. Well, in Eternity, there's this pseudo convention expo fair that's going on where all these people who work for these worlds, which are different versions of the afterlife that people can choose to go to, are trying to sell you on their eternity or their world. And what I found especially funny is just like constantly through the background, we're seeing what all of these other worlds are. My favorite of these probably being Man Free World, especially because if you look closely at the sign for Man Free World, version 443 is at full capacity, but version 444 is coming soon. And I just love the thought that Man Free World is so popular that there is 444 versions of it for people to go to for all eternity. I also like the other subtle little things going on throughout the background. For instance, when Larry first gets to the junction, we see somebody still in their full skydiving suit with a parachute attached. And what I really appreciated about the concept of eternity is not only is the main storyline really compelling with the choice Joan has to make and the rules behind this world that is sort of forcing her to make this choice and dive into the dynamics of these two different relationships. But because this concept is so fantastical, it also opens the door for a lot of really funny afterlife sort of jokes. And I think if you are an enjoyer of The Good Place, you'll probably really appreciate this movie too. I also want to touch on the movie's cinematography and color grading real quick. This could probably be its whole own separate video, but I just want to briefly give the cinematographer and the colorist their accolades because this movie does not shy away from color at all, and it is so refreshing. And now I've talked a little bit before on this channel about cinematography of a couple of movies or shows that I have enjoyed because I feel like nowadays a lot of movies just do not do color very well anymore. Like they are all very dull and washed out. And this movie says, you want color, we'll give you color. And I absolutely love that they kind of took it to the next level in order to showcase this fantasy world of the junction and of these different eternities. So they really amped up the color in this movie and it looks so good, and I miss seeing movies that are so colorful. All this also goes hand in hand with the production design because I absolutely love the concept of the junction being this retro train station. It almost reminds me of the way that the TVA is done in the show Loki, where again we have this fantasy world, but it's represented by almost like this retro kind of business or company. In Eternity, we have this fantasy world and it's represented by this retro train station and hotel. And it was such an interesting setting and an interesting backdrop for this fantasy world of the junction. Cinematographer Rory O'Brien and colorist David Tomiak did an interview with People for Post where they talk a little bit about the color grading, the cinematography, and the overall production design of Eternity, and I found it all to be very interesting. In the interview, David Tomiak praises the production designer for being a crucial part of creating this world. He says, first off, absolutely stunning production design by Zazu Myers. David Frayn's and Zazu's vision for the space was everything. There were so many textures to play with in the grade. So much of the conversation kept coming back to being true and vibrant with those primaries, making those reds and those blues really pop. The color separation with the design helped create a beautiful blend between a nostalgic look and a modern age. We made sure to design a look that didn't hue shift any of the colors. As well, maintaining a thicker contrast, we see all the different designs and textures in the walls, and it really makes every detail pop. I really enjoy the way that David Tomiak talks about his vision for Eternity through color, as well as working hand in hand with Rory O'Brien and David Frayn in order to create this world, because The coloring looks so good in this movie. It almost has this filmic sort of look to it, although it was not shot on film, but that is the feeling you get, especially once we go into the junction and once we start going into different eternities. And I think that's kind of the look that they were overall going for. They talk a little more in this article about the lighting and color, saying, for the junction, we wanted to make sure all the colors popped and the primary colors were so important. Another big factor was keeping our white point pure, making sure we always had a clean reference. This allowed all the individual colors to really sing and made the junction feel bright and dynamic. The different worlds popped independently because of the environments and the lighting they were in. When I was watching the movie, one thing I really noticed while I was watching was the primary colors, and I feel like they use blue, yellow, and red to kind of take you along the journey and tell the story, as well as those colors being so vibrant and vivid throughout. I kind of associated Joan with the color red because she often wears red. Also, we see a lot of red within the junction, and it also may represent the choice that Joan has to make, because when people are in the junction, they have to choose where they want to spend the rest of their lives. But Joan has a little more stakes in her decision. Luke is usually represented by the color blue, and I love that the bluish green world of the mountain eternity is kind of the place that he wants to go and ends up. And then Larry is very much represented by the color yellow. His dream eternity is the beach world. And when we go to the beach world eternity, everything is very bright, harsh yellow. And I love that the separate eternity choices also kind of represent the colors that I identify with each character. I also really liked that when we see Joan in the mountain eternity, there's a scene where she's wearing this plaid blue and red jacket, I believe. And I like that it was this sort of mixing of her color with Luke's color. But then when we see her in the beach eternity with Larry, her bathing suit is red, staying true to her color, but she has this yellow cover up in a way to show the mixing of her color with Larry's color. And I thought that was a really cool touch. I also loved the use of the primary colors throughout. I also read in this article that originally they wanted to make the early scenes when Joan and Larry are alive right before Larry dies to be in black and white. And I think that could have been such an interesting choice, because there is this huge transition to when Larry dies. We know he's in the afterlife because immediately everything is so much more vibrant and colorful within the world of the junction. I think it would have been even more of a dramatic reveal to have the beginning of the movie in black and white and then be seeing color for the first time within the movie, within the junction and the afterlives. But obviously the creatives behind Eternity decided to go in a different direction. A little bit of it was they were scared about audiences' reactions to black and white, because they say a lot of people are turned off when they turn on a movie and they see black and white. They feel like it's something that they don't want to watch, which is kind of sad because it would have only been for the first 5 minutes, but I think it would have been such an interesting little reveal. Instead, in the People of Post article, O'Brien and Tomiak talk about making the beginning of the movie have this sort of 90s indie style feel where everything is a lot less saturated, and it is very noticeable. And we still do get a drastic change between the real world and the afterlife world. I just thought it would have been a really cool concept to start the movie in black and white, although you really do feel the vibrance of the colors anyway. And overall, I liked the choices that they went with. Now I'm excited to discuss the overall writing of this movie, because I thought it was extremely well written in the way the characters are set up, but also within the dynamics of the love triangle. And for this part of the video, there are going to be some spoilers. So if you haven't watched Eternity yet, it is okay to click off and then come back to this video whenever you watch the movie. First, I want to discuss the side characters, specifically Davine Joy Randolph's character of Anna, because not only am I just the biggest fan of Davine Joy Randolph in particular, as she is such a great actress, I thought she brought great comedic relief to the movie, but I love that they give her character development and depth, which a lot of times in these sort of stories doesn't usually happen for somebody who is in a supporting role or in a side character role. So, the character of Anna as the afterlife coordinator is a large part of the comedic relief throughout the movie, but they don't just relegate her to the comedic relief, but instead have these moments where she develops and we get to know a little bit of her backstory. She feels like a real person with depth, and she actually has some really sweet scenes with Larry throughout the movie, which usually doesn't happen, especially in love triangles where they usually tend to focus on the three main characters while everyone else is just kind of in the background. Anna learns from and is inspired by her interactions with Larry. Over time, she has sort of stopped caring about the people that she is working for in order to sort of move them along, but through her interactions with Larry, witnessing Larry's ordinary love and rooting for him helped her realize why she chose to spend her afterlife working a job in the first place and why she loves what she does. Also, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is this scene she has at the end with Larry, where she talks a little bit about her past and we get a little bit more depth to her character. There's this really powerful line where she explains to Larry, coming here was an improvement for me. Even though this scene with Larry feels like such a short interaction, the line that Anna says makes her character so much more fleshed out, gives the audience more of an insight to her background, and gives the character so much more depth than we originally thought. I love Divine Joy Randolph. I think her acting is impeccable and I enjoyed her comedic timing in this movie, but I love that they let her do her thing and they fleshed out her character more and gave her character some more life within the story. Moving on, in one of my very first videos on this channel, I talked specifically about love triangles in media and how I feel like they are not always written in the best way. The way they purposely build someone up to be the perfect choice while they tear another choice down, and so on and so forth. And what I really enjoyed about the writing of Eternity is that Eternity does not take this route. In an interview, director David Frayne talks a little bit about this when he says, "For all of us, it was important that the film could celebrate many kinds of love. Young love, enduring love, and even choosing yourself like Karen does. I never want Joan's choice to seem as right or wrong. It's just the one that reflects who she is now." And I think if I were to sum up this movie, and particularly with the way that the love triangle happens, it would be that it takes you into so many different directions. Now, of course, it's a rom-com. And of course, within early on in the movie, you can kind of predict how it's going to end. I saw some other reviews complaining about the predictability about the ending of this movie. And to that I say, to me, that is not the point of a rom-com. Going into a rom-com movie, I think we all are supposed to kind of know how the story's gonna end. That's just how rom-coms are. But the reason why people watch rom-coms is more so for the journey. And what I will say about Eternity is that the way that Eternity gets us to the final part in the movie was something that I wasn't expecting. And the turns that the movie kind of takes along the way and the way that they explore all the options, I thought was pretty interesting. Then, of course, the movie is pushing us into recognizing that Larry wasn't this perfect choice or he wasn't this perfect memory of this passionate love, but through a lot of the interactions that we see Larry have with Joan, we can tell that he is the right choice because he just gets her and understands her. And a lot of their moments and interactions together are so ordinary, but I think that is what the movie is trying to highlight, is the ordinary love of Larry and Joan. I also love that the movie explores almost like the manic pixie dream boy effect of Luke. First of all, they cast Callum Turner, aka Mr. Dua Lipa, to be Luke, so I know a lot of girlies were rooting for Mr. Dua Lipa at the end, but I think the movie does a good job of showing that the idea of Luke and the memory of Luke seems so perfect, but Luke is very much still a flawed human and a flawed character himself, even if they have to have Luke himself scream at the other characters that he is not perfect. And that's something else I really enjoyed about the writing in terms of these three main characters within the movie is that none of them are perfect. Both Luke and Larry, as options for Joan, have their own separate pros and cons. It all depends not on the person, but overall the person's dynamic with Joan, which I think is so important in a love triangle. Not one person being the right choice and one person being the wrong choice, but it more so being about who Joan is as a person at this point in time and her dynamic with who Luke is as a person at this point in time versus who Larry is as a person at this point in time. I saw some reviews complaining that Larry didn't even wait a week for Joan. He was ready to leave and hope that she would go to some beach eternity when he knew she didn't like the beach. Meanwhile, Luke waited 67 years for her, which is crazy. Whereas a lot of the people who saw some flaws in Luke didn't like the fact that he didn't want to really hear about Joan's life after him, even though the bulk of Joan's life was spent after him and he didn't want to care about her kids or her grandkids or any of that stuff, which is kind of depressing because if you love Joan, you should love her family too. And so both options, as well as Joan, who also has her own character flaws, have their own mistakes that they made in terms of their relationship with Joan. And I thought it was very compelling that we got a real love triangle with two realistic options and we didn't just get the good choice versus the bad choice. I feel like Eternity has this theme of showcasing the importance of ordinary love and how it's the little things and the small interactions that could really mean the most versus the grand gestures and the big moments. And that's really the juxtaposition between Luke and Larry. But they don't hammer this point over your head because Joan is so far removed from who she was when she was with Luke. Luke kind of gets put on this pedestal in her memories as this perfect person, but getting to actually see Luke and dive deeper into his character, we know that's actually not the case. And I like the way the movie kind of does this in a more subtle way versus some other movies I've watched recently that are love triangles that kind of build up the idea of the perfect person and being like, but he's not always perfect for you or whatever. And I don't know. I think the way that it's done in Eternity is a little bit more subtle because Joan is aware and actually gets to spend time with Luke before she makes her decision. Also, I like that the movie explored the option of choosing neither. Now, like I said, we all knew the direction the movie was heading, so we knew the movie was not going to end with Joan choosing neither of the guys, but I do like that the movie explores that as an option and lets us know that's an option because in a lot of media with love triangles, it's either team A or team B, but a lot of times we, the audience, are screaming at the screen for the woman to just choose neither and to live her life in peace without either of these idiots. And I do like that Joan was very close to living her life in peace without choosing either of the idiots. And I like that that is Joan's original choice within the movie because she can't decide. She feels like either way she is hurting one of the people and she's also hurting herself by cutting herself off from the other person. And I do like that she says, it'll be better if I just go off on my own without you guys. And I like that that is an option for a character like Karen, who is now able to live her life in peace alone, and she doesn't have to be with her husband in the afterlife. One thing I do wish the movie expanded a little bit more on was some closure for Luke, or at least closure for me as an audience member to know that Luke was going to end up being okay, because I do feel kind of bad at the end of the movie for Mr. Dua Lipa over there, as he did wait 67 years for Joan, doing a job in the afterlife, mind you. Like, he chose to spend his eternity working crazy just so he could wait for her and then find out that things didn't work out. And now he's kind of alone in his mountain eternity. He's kind of stuck there without her, and he still loves her. Either way, through his time spent with Joan, I think he was starting to realize that she was a much different person than the person that he knew and remembers, because he knew her when she was much, much younger and when he was much, much younger. So it does make sense why things didn't work out, even though it may not have been what he was expecting. He waited 67 years for Joan, and then it didn't work out, and now he's all off on his own in his mountain eternity. That's kind of one thing I wish the script would have explored just a little bit more, although I know that's not what the movie is about. So once Joan decides to go with Larry, that's what we're gonna see. But I feel a little bit bad for Mr. Dua Lipa. So overall, while the love triangle is definitely not my favorite trope, I think I can enjoy it when it is written to show diverse dynamics between a group of people. And I think this movie really explores the different dynamics and all three characters very well. And that's why I enjoyed the love triangle, particularly in this movie. I liked seeing Joan's dynamic with Luke. I like that she acts differently with Luke than the way she acts when she's with Larry. And I like that these subtle differences in the way that Joan acts, like almost like a reversion to her younger self, versus Larry is more like her comfortable self and who she truly is when she's around him. And I like showing the little nuances in the dynamics between the two relationships, is also giving comfort to the audience knowing that Joan made the right choice for herself. I also really like the scene of when Joan is escaping her eternity with Luke in order to go find Larry, and she has to escape through her past memories with Larry, which include some not so great memories. And I like the concept of showing what she was willing to go through in order to get to Larry, and also that her and Larry's relationship was never perfect, but they did love each other, and that's where Joan wants to be at the end of the day. And I thought that was a cool visual metaphor. Finally, if I were to give a criticism on this movie, it would be that it did feel a little bit long, which is crazy because usually if I'm enjoying a movie, I don't mind if it's really long. But there was a point within watching Eternity where I felt like maybe they could have cut out 10 to 15 minutes, and I think overall the story could have felt much tighter. But what do I know? I'm not a writer. Also, that is weird for me to say because usually I tend to be like,
why did you cut this scene? Put every scene in the movie.
And for some reason, when I was watching Eternity, I felt like maybe a good 10 minutes could have been cut and the pacing of the movie would have flowed just a bit better. But that's just my own personal little nitpicking criticism. So with all that being said, I still think Eternity is an underrated gem, and I hope if anyone watches this video, it encourages them to watch the movie, because I think when we actually have a rom-com that was done well in terms of not just the performances, but the writing, the storytelling, and also through the movie's visuals, we have to hype it up, because it's not every day nowadays that we are getting very good, compelling rom-coms. And it's not every day that these rom-coms seem to also look amazing. But I'm very interested to know if you also watched this movie and what you thought of it, what you thought about the dynamics between the characters. Did you have the same opinions as me? Were you rooting for Team Larry or Team Luke, aka Team Mr. Dua Lipa? Let me know in the comments. So if you like this video, be sure to leave me a like, leave me a comment, click on my channel and check out some of my other stuff. And if you enjoy that other stuff, you might want to subscribe to my channel so you always know when I post a new video. And with all that being said, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.